Hi, I'm Andy Clark. Welcome back to Stuff and Nonsense. Over the past few videos, I've reviewed the websites of the UK's main political parties and discussed how effective I thought their designs were. I've included links to other videos in the description. Now, since I suppose the late 90s, every time a general election comes around, the political parties roll out new websites. Having spent time studying Labour's 2024 campaign website, I wondered what their previous election websites looked like. Labour's website for this year's campaign didn't look much different from how it did a year ago when Sir Keir Starmer introduced the party's 5 new missions, or the year before that when the opposition party was focused on fundraising and membership, or the year even before that when Keir Starmer took over from Jeremy Corbyn in 2020. Then the flat design fad was at its height, and the party's designers had gone all in and embraced it with their solid colours and sharp corners. When Jeremy Corbyn went up against Boris Johnson in 2019 with another slogan about change, surely Labour can think of another slogan. Anything. The website design hadn't lost all its skeuomorphic shadows, but like Corbyn, it was an unconvincing patchwork of ill-conceived ideas. The banner space contained nothing that would convince people to vote for Labour. Instead, it included a newsletter sign-up. The second most important space on the page wasn't devoted to policies, but to a second-by-second countdown to an election that everyone knew Labour would lose. Jeremy Corbyn became Labour leader in 2015, and in 2017 he fought a campaign against then Conservative leader Theresa May, who called a snap election 3 years before one was due. Theresa May's gamble didn't pay off and she lost a majority, but despite gaining seats, Jeremy Corbyn didn't do enough to win the election. As seems to be a continuing theme with Labour's election websites, there was no mention of manifesto commitments or planned policies, just some vague promise to govern for the many and not the few. Ed Miliband beat his brother to the Labour leadership, and in 2015 he fought a campaign against the incumbent Conservative Prime Minister, David, now Lord, Cameron. Opinion polls had predicted that the result would be a second consecutive hung parliament, but David Cameron won a majority, enabling him to ditch his coalition partners and paving the way for that terrible Brexit referendum. Yet again, Labour's message was change. This time, their website design did at least include some information about what Labour would do to bring it about. It was also forward-thinking in many respects, containing several design tropes we still see today. It also represented the sea change in web design between 2010 and 2015. Compared to previous layouts, Labour's 2015 website design was massively simplified. It was the first to contain that full-width jumbotron banner that we see everywhere today. There's a 3-column content card layout which directly results from a generic 12-column grid. Then there's full-width, centre-justified text and buttons. This website design dramatically differed from 5 years earlier in 2010, when Gordon Brown lost to David Cameron after a decade of Labour in power. So what happened over those 5 years? Responsive design was popularised in 2010, but hadn't become mainstream in time for the election that year. Web fonts were implemented in Apple Safari and Mozilla Firefox in 2008, and in 2009, Typekit, the first commercial web font service, was launched. Google launched its own library of free open source fonts in 2010, but web fonts weren't used in Labour's design until later. In 2010, Labour's election campaign was a disaster. In many ways, its second CSS-based election website design still remained remarkably similar to previous table-based designs. It had a common layout pattern with a content column and sidebar. It used system fonts and had an almost non-existent visual and typographic hierarchy, which at the time was common. The election returned a hung parliament, and David Cameron took the Conservatives into a coalition with the Liberal Democrats to gain power and end 13 years of Labour government. The result was far from the jubilation of Tony Blair's third consecutive election victory 5 years earlier in 2005 against Conservative leader Michael Howard, who had stood twice as a Labour candidate in Liverpool. The 2005 design was the first of Labour's websites to use CSS for layout. Jeffrey Zeldman's Designing with Web Standards book had been published 2 years earlier, and CSS was already established as the layout tool for the future. Despite being one of the oldest, this design stands up remarkably well. It has emphatic calls to action in the header, clear routes for potential voters to take, and information about why they should vote Labour for a third time. Not much remains of Labour's 2001 campaign website, which was table-based and developed using Dreamweaver and Fireworks for image slicing. Now, for this screenshot, I reconstructed the original homepage from fragments found on several pages saved in the Wayback Machine. Technically, it's typical of websites made the same year that Internet Explorer was released, with GIF images for buttons and spacers and JavaScript swap image rollover navigation. Barely anything is left of Labour's campaign website from its victory in '97 under Tony Blair. It used the domain labourwin97.org.uk, and I could only find a message from after the campaign pointing to Labour's main website. It wasn't archived by the Wayback Machine, so I reimagined what it might have looked like. Reconstructing Labour's website means knowing what websites looked like in 1997. The Wayback Machine is one source, and the Web Design Museum has a section on web design in the 90s, which starts the year before the 1997 election. It includes screenshots of websites from Adobe, AOL, Apple, and interestingly, the very first BBC election website. Back then, links were mostly blue. The typographic hierarchy was relatively flat, and fonts came from the system unless they were embedded in images. Shadows were popular for graphical style elements, and list markers were frequently three-dimensional. As for the layout, widths were almost always fixed, with a side column that contained the navigation. The BBC's election website typified this design style with its fixed sidebar and three-dimensional and pill-shaped navigation. Labour's printed campaign materials from the '97 election are also useful, including campaign leaflets, the famous policy pledge card, and the cover of their manifesto. Back then, Labour's signature red was a different hue and more saturated than its current colour, and they used their now defunct yellow accent. For text in today's online and offline materials, Labour's standardised on Poppins, the free-to-use typeface designed by Indian Type Foundry and available from Google Fonts. In 1997, Franklin Gothic was their chosen typeface, mostly used in bold or black, and with subtle negative tracking. Knowing what we know about the design styles common in '97 and how Labour branded itself online, how might its general election website have looked? Well, Macromedia acquired FutureSplash in '96 and rebranded it as Macromedia Flash. Although Flash wasn't installed on most desktop browsers until the early 2000s, launching a generation of websites with splash screens, you could imagine similar intro screens in the late 90s. With its eerily similar colours, McDonald's intro screen encouraged people to click on the golden arches to enter the main site. Labour could have followed their lead by asking those people to click on the rose. Similarly, the three buttons on the left could have taken people to the most important areas of Labour's website. their message from Tony Blair, 5 pledges, and the election manifesto. Microsoft FrontPage was launched in '96. Macromedia then launched Dreamweaver, its IDE for web development, in the same year as the general election. Both made laying out pages using HTML tables easier, spurred on by David Siegel's 1997 book, Creating Killer Websites. But both David's book and the popularity of Dreamweaver came after the election. This didn't stop designers at the time from creating relatively complex, often off-the-grid layouts. Designers at Nokia, then Europe's largest mobile phone manufacturer, used image maps and tables to create an integrated panel including HTML and replaced text content and a sliced-up graphic. Labour's designers might have made something similar, combining the black and white photograph of Tony Blair with New Labour messaging and red-yellow sticker-style graphics that they used offline. Whereas the Nokia grid is implied, many designs like this 97 design for Centura featured an explicit grid made obvious by its use of borders between the HTML table cells. Those borders contained graphic text elements that Labour might have used for their links to Tony Blair's message, 5 pledges, and election manifesto. Labour could have also included their 5 pledges as HTML to make the page more appealing to search engines. InfoSeek had launched in '94. A search facility was added to the Yahoo directory in '95, and Excite launched the same year along with Alta Vista. Google wasn't founded until a year and a half after Labour's victory. So how do I imagine Labour's lost '97 general election website look like? Judging by the post-election graphic with which Labour replaced their Labour Win '97 campaign website, their offline materials and the design styles popular at the time, it would have included a black and white photograph of Tony Blair similar to their general election manifesto. Gleaning what I can from code snippets on the Wayback Machine of other websites around the time, the navigation would have included links to news and views. These could have been styled similarly to the 3-dimensional pill-shaped buttons on the BBC election website. It could have also included graphical text elements linking to the most important content, plus maybe a JavaScript jump menu, which was also popular at the time. And then, of course, there may have been those best viewed in browser badges. What did Labour's lost '97 general election website look like? This is my best guess, but I don't know. Maybe if someone at Labour Party HQ answers my email, I might at last find out. So, if you like this video, please like it, subscribe and hit the bell to be notified when the next one's available. You might also want to check out my Quick Takes design reviews, which will help you get on the road to a better website design. There's a link in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.